Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and have a real privilege to sit down today with Kiersten Todt. Kiersten is president at Wondros, which is a creative firm focused on social change and policy change. She previously served at the Office of National Drug Control Policy, ONDCP, at the White House, as a staffer on the U.S. Senate Homeland Security Committee, working counterterrorism and homeland security issues, and most recently as chief of staff at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Kiersten's known to all in the field, a bright light for so many years, trying to move these issues forward. So Kiersten, really excited to sit down with you today.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to be with you.
You know, when we look at cyber issues and where we are today, obviously there's so much we've observed, and you played a key role in remedying and fixing. But I thought we'd start with maybe most recently, coming right out of CISA, and where you oversaw a bunch of the strategy that the agency was putting forward. What are two or three things that you were most happy to see, most excited about?
Well, it was an interesting time because, you know, at the time, CISA was the youngest agency. It's not the youngest agency anymore, but it started in 2018. And so there was a lot of growth and building. And I think, you know, with Jen Easterly's leadership and looking across just the leadership of the agency, it was both internal and external. Internally, as chief of staff, I think some of the things that I was so pleased with was how we built out the workforce. We started laying the groundwork for a neurodiversity initiative to engage individuals with neurodiversity and really look at building a more inclusive workforce. It's obviously not easy in government and really anywhere when you're dealing with that size, but I think we planted the seeds for some important work. I think also building the collaboration with industry. It's tough when you don't have the regulatory authorities, but at the same time, you're given an opportunity to really build partnership and collaboration. And Frank, you and I have been working in this a long time to know that the word partnership doesn't always have meaning. You know, we talk about public-private partnership, but trying to really engage in trust and collaboration. And I think, you know, a function of the times as well as the threat has really been the cross-sector engagement. And that's, I think, the credit of government writ large. It's just appreciating that while there are critical infrastructure sectors, if we're truly looking at securing them, we have to look with a cross-sector approach. And I feel like we've made a lot of progress with that.
Well, I'm going to pull the thread on all those points momentarily, but before I do that, any regrets, any unfinished business that you wish?
Well, I think I mean, in government service, you always want to do more, right? I mean, it's always, there's never a time, as a civil servant, there's never a more important time because you wake up every morning feeling like you're contributing to the greater good, and that work is never done. And so, you know, whenever you walk out the doors for the last time of that particular job, there's always some sense of, you know, there's so much to do and so much you want to do, and tremendous gratitude for the opportunity to serve. So lots of stuff, no regrets, just a lot of work to be done, and you know, you wish you could just continue to do it forever.
Well said. That was perfectly said, actually. So let's talk workforce. And you brought up neurodiversity, which is a passion issue of mine, because I do feel there's so much talent that is not being pulled into the fight. You see the numbers. The deficit is staggering, but doing the same thing as we always do is not necessarily going to get us over the goal line. Let's maybe start with that. If you were to sort of look at the workforce deficit and where we are as a country, not only in government, but also in industry, how can we think about this a little differently?
Well, I think, you know, you and I have talked about this. I sort of believe that every role has a cyber component to it. So when we talk about the cyber workforce gap, I understand what that means, but I really think we all have this cyber responsibility. And so when we're thinking about cyber solutions and we're thinking about the actual positions, when we see cybersecurity, it's about building things, building solutions, building products, building outcomes, and problem solving. And if we understand and we agree that those are the two critical elements to cybersecurity, then we appreciate that the most effective way we do this is by diversity of thinking, bringing in sociologists, psychologists, economists, politicians, you know, kind of thinking through all of this. And so really trying to attract more than just individuals with aptitudes in math and science. Like you, I have a real passion for neurodiversity because I think we as a nation will be so much better if we create inclusive workforces that represent and acknowledge and honor the aptitudes of individuals that we may not define as being in a band that we see as, quote, typical. And I think when we appreciate, I sit on an advisory board for a company that has a workforce that's 50% neurodiverse, that are developing AI algorithms that are outpacing other workforces because there's an aptitude there that we really have to honor and elevate. And I think that's true for all, for all skills and aptitudes. We know that individuals who are hard of seeing have tremendous hearing. We know that individuals who are hard of hearing can see things that the typical eye doesn't see. So we just have to build out our band of really appreciating and attracting and really engaging individuals who have a diversity of thinking.
And very well said. And I mean, if you go back to World War II, I think it was largely neurodiverse individuals who won the Great War. Those behind some of the most sophisticated cryptologists, cryptographers, and the like that cracked the Enigma code and so much more. And I just feel like there's more we can do. And what are some other thoughts around sort of building up the workforce? Because I don't think it's purely a numbers game. And I think you're very right by highlighting you don't only need sort of the cyber delta force that are very sophisticated in terms of their capabilities around zeros, ones, and the like. But everyone has a cyber responsibility today. Everyone. Pretty much nothing doesn't run one way or another, and being cyber aware is so important. But I'd be curious what some of your thoughts are.
Well, I think it's bringing it into curriculum, bringing cybersecurity into the curriculum at a young age. I mean, we've talked about K through 12, engaging, when a first grader gets an iPad, they should be understanding what does it mean to be cyber secure. They can develop an interest in that. We know that young kids tend to want to be what is in their life, a construction worker, a doctor, a teacher. And so if we look at that, then we're also looking at high school, bringing this into vocational schools, to community colleges. There have been some really thoughtful proposals about non-degree work in cybersecurity. And
I want to pull that thread too.
Because one of the things that you see are that there's so much technology out there that people will just generate an interest on their own in this, and they develop this capability and this aptitude. And I think we have to just be able to identify that you don't necessarily need a degree that aligns with an aptitude in order for you to have an opportunity in the workforce. And more, if we're looking at really going into communities that typically don't have access, being able to provide this workforce opportunity, we have to flex out to really be engaging and, again, be inclusive and really expand our definition on what qualifications mean and what it means to be qualified for a role.
Auburn University is a land-grant university and started around agriculture, and we have a responsibility throughout the state, especially in communities of need around agriculture. If you were to build land grants today in addition to agriculture, which is essential to our well-being and public health safety and our economy, you would probably come up with cyber. It would be top of the list of what a new land grant would look like if we were to establish those today. And
sounds like you have a new policy you're building.
I think we're slowly building that policy, and we have a responsibility to the communities, especially in some of the more poor communities and communities of need, that I think we have an opportunity to not only bring about new job opportunities, but also, truth is everyone is cyber vulnerable.
Right.
So, what about gamification? Have you looked into that? Because I'm going to put another pet rock on the table here. I am a trustee at the Alabama School for Cyber Technology and Engineering, first magnet school focused on cyber. The applied side is what attracts most of these kids. It's not sitting behind a computer and just the zeros and ones. It's actually seeing the fruit of their work and actually getting involved. Any thoughts there around gamification?
Well, and I think that's human nature. There are people who do enjoy sitting in front of the computer and being able to do it, but generally we like to see the application of this in ways that can engage. And so I absolutely think it's another tool for, again, creating an inclusive workforce and also going into underserved communities, going into communities that don't always have the resources for kids to see, hey, I have an interest here, I have an aptitude here, I can take something that is critical, I understand it. I think it helps to build self-esteem. What we're looking at is how do we increase the ability for individuals from all walks of life to have work, to see an opportunity to contribute to a greater good. And in fact, in many ways, cybersecurity is this great equalizer because it really doesn't actually differentiate. We each have an ability. I am not a real technical person, but there are parts of cyber that I really align with. And I think that, some people will just take different pieces of it. It's such a diverse field. We often talk about the language in cybersecurity, and this term cybersecurity has become, a little heavy and it's jargon, but there's a reason for that. It's because it's so inclusive. It really means so much. And if you think about that from a positive side, it means that, just about everybody can have an opportunity within this field.
And do you think that that's permeating and translating across? I do remember when I first served in the White House, cyber was this black magic, and we know the characters that played that up. But I do think now you have cabinet members, you've got agency heads who sort of grew up around the technology and a little more aware, if not savvy, and I would argue they are more savvy. But do you think that that's permeating?
I do, because I think cyber is so much more part of what we're doing, and we are able to see it more as a tool than, to your point. There was a period of time where those who knew it kind of took that elusiveness as a, as a craze. Exactly. It's like, well, you won't understand this. And it's like, probably not. But I think now, as we simplify it, as we demystify it, all these words that are now used to align, but it is seen as a tool across anything. You talk about agriculture. There are, huge opportunities for how we're able to bring this technology into creating efficiencies in agriculture, into farming. I think, we see that this cuts across every part of our lives. As with everything, we need to do this deliberately and thoughtfully. But to your point, I do think it is permeating.
Great. And I feel that, but it's more anecdotal than empirical. But I'm sure that there is some empirical data that would make that case. What about women? The numbers, I think, are staggeringly low. And I do feel that there is opportunity to attract more smart women into the field. That you shouldn't be the exception, you should be the rule for all of this. Why do you think we struggle there?
Well, I think that it's more legacy and historical as far as the national security space. These things do not change overnight. And so if we look at these issues that, sort of we're able to, nurture cybersecurity through the years. It is national security, counterterrorism, homeland security, fields where there were typically a lot of men. But I think that it's so important then when we look at, the workforce that we want to build, we don't focus on a gender, on a trait, on a demographic. Absolutely. It's really how do we bring everybody into this? Because I think we can probably, to your point about empirical analysis, there are deficits across lots of different demographic traits, different, I think, qualifications. But our goal should be how are we ensuring that we're making this an inclusive space and really attracting all types of people, because that is really what's going to benefit the space toward innovation, toward progress.
And upskilling veterans, is that something that you've been,
yes.
And I know CISA was supporting efforts along these lines. I think that's another pool of very talented, with real world experience, maybe not the way we would define it in a textbook, but more importantly, the way it actually has impact in the real world. Any
absolutely.
Thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of good efforts that are out there. We can always be doing more. But again, it's how do we make this space look accessible and be accessible to talented people. I mean, to your point, veterans have such a broad, diverse depth of experience in fields that we absolutely need to be bringing into our commercial industry government workspace. And having the programs that reskill, upskill, and even, older people. We see in our markets as people get pushed out for age, for other reasons, experience, for aptitudes in technology, we have an opportunity. It's another segment of the workforce that we can bring. But certainly, our ability to serve our veterans is so critical. And obviously, I think we have, not done the work that we could do. But this is an opportunity to be able to engage from a workforce development.
Not only the right thing, but the smart thing, too, and it expands. So I'd be curious in terms of volunteer organizations and for transparency, you played a key role in a recent report we did looking at priorities for the incoming administration and weighed in heavily on some of these concepts. So curious if you'd be, or would appreciate you sharing some of that with our listeners and viewers.
So one of the things when I first started working on this, so in 2016, I ran President Obama's Commission on Cybersecurity. And at the time, there was an effort to create a national reserve for cybersecurity. So it would mobilize forces at the local level. It didn't really take off in different ways, but we've started to see this build. And in my current role, I've been working very closely with Craig Newmark Philanthropies. And one of the things that he has done is really grant money and resources to organizations that are looking at recruiting volunteer workforces so that when something happens, you have a community that's able to be mobilized. And whether it's people whose day job is a CISO, a CIO, or they have an aptitude, it's sort of like their gig interest, and being able to engage them. Because the piece that we always have to remember is that a typical cyber event, regardless of how massive it seems and whatever national newspaper covers it, it starts in a community. It starts at the local level. And so being able to engage those individuals is critical. One of the things you asked earlier about accomplishments at CISA, I think one of the things that we did really well was investing in our regional teams. They're modeled after the FEMA offices, but really creating leadership in cybersecurity advisors, physical security advisors, so that when something happens, we have a team from the federal government with FBI, with others, that can go right to the location and mobilize quick resources. There's a lot more happening there. There are now election security advisors, which are helping with certainly creating safe and secure elections. But I think it's a really important element of how the federal government can connect to the community level and have a team there ready to help the community.
And I can tell you from personal experience, the regional CISA officer in representing Auburn, Alabama, is very active, including Auburn, Alabama, very active in our work, and she's doing some phenomenal work.
That's great.
So, when I look at volunteer opportunities, every once in a while we can pull some good ideas from other countries. And have you spent any time in Estonia by any chance?
I have not.
So they have a pretty unique cyber reserve corps. And keep in mind, there tends to be countries that are very strong in cyber have lots of experience. So you've got Estonia, you've got Israel, you've got Singapore. They all have live in arguably tough neighborhoods and lots of scar tissue and experience. But there is a model there that I think is worth looking at, the Cyber Reserve Corps that they stood up. But I think your bigger point is I think we tend to forget, and you and I spent a lot of time thinking through the initial Homeland Security work that the U.S. government stood up, and same sort of sets of questions, right?
Yeah.
It can't be one from D.C.
Right.
At the end of the day, the first to arrive and the last to leave are going to be local.
Yes.
And when I look at state, local, tribal, and territorial, I think there's more that needs to be done there, and supporting that, I think, should be priority 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Very much so that also brings up, so you also were a founder of the Cyber Readiness Institute, which was really focused on bringing capabilities to small and medium-sized business. Just like SLTT, small and medium-sized business, they assume the same risk as the Fortune 100 do, but don't have the resources that Fortune 100 firms do. What are some of your thoughts there around supply chain and then more generally?
Well, it's so critical. I mean, so the commission, we had 8 issues given to us by President Obama, and one of them was small and medium-sized businesses. And it was we started in March and we ended presenting the report to him in December. So it was 9 months. And when we finished, 2 of the commissioners, the CEO of MasterCard at the time, Ajay Banga, and the retired CEO, the vice chair of the commission, Sam Palmisano, at the time, we came together to say, what more can we do with this commission? Because it was a very active group. It's sort of like the groups always that you lead, you engage everybody. And with them and the CEO of Microsoft at the time, because the head of research was on the commission, and the former Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, came together to say, let's create a nonprofit that helps and supports small businesses, not by recommending technologies that they have to procure, but really getting to this place of what's the role of humans and people in cybersecurity. So the premise of the recommendations and of the program is all based on human behavior. It's educating on doing multi-factor authentication, a strong password, software updates, not falling victim to phishing emails. So it really looked at you as a small business. If you can do these basics, if you can educate your business on these pieces, you can create a base level of cybersecurity. Because one of the things, so we started this in 2017, and then a couple of years later with COVID, we saw how everything went digital and supply chains. We had a member who's a Fortune 100 manufacturing company that at one point had a real challenge because one of their small businesses got hit by ransomware, and it was in their supply chain, in their assembly line. And I think that we have to appreciate that if you are a large company, you could be doing everything to keep yourself secure, but if you're not making your ecosystem secure, then you're creating then there are vulnerabilities. And how do we have greater visibility into supply chain is important, but really helping and providing resources to small businesses. This is where I think the information sharing and analysis centers, the ISACs, these sector organizations can help by sharing resources and by becoming more collaborative. I think they're doing a great job, but there's always opportunity to really raise the level for small businesses, because we can't function, our sectors don't function without the security and safety and operationalism of small businesses.
And small and medium-sized businesses don't always have a seat at the ISACs, understandably, because they don't have the time and the bandwidth and the resources necessarily. So one of the big findings of the first national cyber strategy that Chris Inglis laid out is shifting some of the burden to those that can handle it better, whether it was the big cloud providers or the Microsofts or the AWSs or you name the big firms. What more do you think can be done there? Because at the end of the day, I don't think it's the Fortune 100. They're putting the resources out there, and they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. They're spending, but how do we get to the point where we can get small and medium? They're on the front lines, and ransomware has truly democratized the risk. It's not just the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party of China or Russia or Iran, but it's anyone trying to take advantage.
Well, it's a business model. I mean, that's the challenge.
Model, and you got to disrupt that business model, right?
But that's, well, absolutely.
I don't want to lead the witness.
Okay. Well, and I remember it was several years ago, there was, I think it was a 60 Minutes show, it was on ransomware, and it talked about a community in Arkansas. It was a local government that had a ransom attack, and they asked for $50,000, and the community said, we can afford $8,000. And they were like, okay, that's fine. I mean, we have to remember that ransomware is a business model. And so what are we doing then to help mitigate that model? We know that there are basic things to prevent ransomware. Similarly with cyber hygiene, right? When we find out that, and you know, going back a couple of years to Colonial Pipeline, when we find out that major infrastructure is vulnerable because of a lack of multi-factor authentication or the basics, how can we get this into the culture? So there is the piece about the responsibility to industry, which I very much agree with, you know, going back and really getting at the source of the problem, creating secure software, creating secure hardware. Then we're in a place where how do we create a culture of safety and security, so that consumers, and whether that's an entity that's procuring services or just a consumer like you and me, starts to use security and safety as a differentiator for purchase. You know, if we start to look at cybersecurity as an element of what's important to us, it obviously can't be framed quite as that, because to our point about language, it doesn't grab us.
Yep.
But it's like, how can we get to that energy label type issue where we start to understand how secure is this entity? And it's not that they all need to be at a certain level, but it's what's my risk appetite for this type of product, for this company. If I see that they haven't done what they should be doing, how much do I want it versus another company that's put more forward? So I think it's that balance.
And Trustmark and some of the labeling. Yep. Any thoughts there?
Well, I do. I mean, we actually talked about labeling in the commission in 2016. I do think there's an opportunity, because I think labeling is also
this
education.
Heavy in Solarium
yes,
too. Yeah.
Because there's also an education in labeling, right? The reason why we as a nation understand what saturated fats are not because we all have this private interest in nutrition. It's because we've all come to socialize nutrition labels, and we know how to read them to be, how am I evaluating sodium and carbohydrates? And it doesn't mean I'm not going to have the chocolate cake. I'm just going to know what I'm getting.
Yep.
And so I do think, because I see nutrition labels not just as a security piece, but I see it very much as an education piece. It's an opportunity for us to reach a lot of people.
And again, Singapore has been forward-leaning in some of these efforts, and it's working. Granted,
right.
I mentioned countries that are much smaller. They're smaller than
they're
many
models.
states, but they're models.
Yeah, absolutely.
To build on, and that's a perfect sort of segue into human behavior. I mean, all things said and done, technology changes, human nature remains consistent.
Yes.
Also, even from an adversarial, a red-blue perspective, there's someone behind the clickety-clack of the keyboard, or at least someone initiating automated attacks behind the clickety-clack of the keyboard. How do we get to the point? And I think we need to hit a tipping point, but I'm not sure I fully understand this. But at Wondros, you're doing some good work to be able to make change in communities. And I'd be curious, we kind of know what we need to do. How do we get to the point where we do it?
Yeah, well, it's about understanding people. And so we talk about human-centered design at Wondros, which is very much, it's not just sort of researching people, but it's actually talking to people and understanding what are their blocks around certain things. So we've done work in healthcare. Wondros has in issues around addiction, around mental health.
And I'd love to hear more about that, because I think that has pertinence.
It all weaves together around poverty, but certainly healthcare, and now we're doing a lot of work in cybersecurity and AI. And we launched this campaign a little over a month ago for Craig Newmark Philanthropies called the Take 9 campaign. And that came about because our researchers were really talking to people, both CISOs, CIOs, but also everyday people, organizations. And what we've learned, and we know this intuitively, but how do you translate it, is right now the greatest challenge in cybersecurity, why so many people are falling victim to it, is urgency. It's that sense of, you've got to do this now at the most senior levels of companies and just as pedestrians. I think each of us knows somebody, if not ourselves, who has received a call, and it's that urgency. But we're losing so much money in our economy around cybersecurity. So the point is to come up with a way, as we understand what people's fears are or what they see as opportunities, engage communities through that, and then we can help to build out, educate, empower. I think one of the key pieces in cybersecurity right now is, how do we help individuals appreciate that it's not beyond their control, that they can actually change something from a reaction to a response. We react to something quickly, but we can respond thoughtfully. And as we look at building out communities and ensuring that we're creating a culture of security, Craig Newmark calls this a community of cyber civil defenders. What is each of our roles? What is our accountability and responsibility to help make our nation more secure when it comes to cybersecurity? As you said, it affects all of us.
Awesome. And can you maybe paint a picture on some of the previous campaigns and how you think that may apply? Yeah,
so we, Wondros worked on the Stand Up for Cancer campaign. How do you engage people to understand how it's impacting everybody in an effort to both educate, inform, and then to create resources. We're working on poverty issues, on how to help educate on what's happening in poverty, and then to engage on mental health. We're starting, we've done some work with fentanyl, and we're doing an addiction campaign, but with fentanyl, a nonprofit called Song for Charlie, which was started by a couple who lost their son. And when we see, and it was just in some of the campaign discussions around how fentanyl is really impacting everybody in some way, one, first degree or second degree. I think, a couple years ago, Secretary Mayorkas talked about fentanyl as one of the most challenging national security crises that we have. But I think the most representative campaign that Wondros has worked on is with the National Institutes of Health, the All of Us research program. It started 7 years ago. The objective was to ensure demographic representation for clinical trials by engaging 1 million people across the country. Wow. And right now we've got over 800.
That's a serious end.
It's a serious
sample.
piece. And so right now we've got over 800,000 individuals representing all congressional districts. But it's what they've done with that research. They've created over 100,000 genome sequences. They're coming up with treatments and therapies for rare diseases. It's this appreciation that if we can engage more people in healthcare research, then we will do more to further healthcare research and how critical that is.
And when I think about it, each one of these items is, I don't want to say epidemic phase, but each one affects everyone in one way or another. And it's actually trying to induce some changes in behavior, right? Because I think most of us know what we need to do on the cyber side, getting it done, and if I'm being honest, it's hard in my own household. So,
well, my daughter will laugh at me. She's like, "You do this for a living." When I have something wrong with my phone,
exactly,
it's not. Exactly, it's not natural. But I think it's this: how do we make this human so everybody understands that they're a part of it? One of the things in our research on the cyber campaign was the shame that's involved, which is fascinating. Like, when people have been a victim of something, they don't want to talk about it.
Interesting.
But when you talk about it and you share it and you appreciate that you're not alone and that there's more there, you create this massive community of support, but importantly of agency, of empowerment, where people are like, okay, we've got to stop this. You go from being a victim to being an actor, and creating more of an activist culture in cybersecurity, as well as some of these other issues, really helps to turn the tide and to create change.
Oh, that's awesome. And translating that into action is, it'll take us a long way.
Yeah.
And I think part of that really does step back to K through 12, where you're
absolutely
not coming into this issue thinking about it for the first time at higher ed. Of course, we love higher ed and cyber, but it needs to go broader and more deeply and ultimately cause people to act. So, Kiersten, what questions didn't I ask that I should have?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I think it might be a little bit sort of a current, flavor of the day, but it's, what do we want in the next administration? I think one of the things that you led so well with the report, the transition report, is the nonpartisan nature of cybersecurity. And I think the most important piece is that we have to ensure continuity. We've had great work from several administrations going back to back in cybersecurity, that we have to build off of the continued good work to really look at these problems, and they're getting more complex with nation-state threats. These are getting more challenging, they're getting more urgent. And the importance of working together across the aisle, but just working across sectors, really across communities, has never been more critical. And that's what we have to lead with that right now.
Couldn't have said that better if I tried. I mean, the reality is these are issues that require it's not a good thing. It's a must to ensure that they transcend parties, because these are issues that affect everybody. American. And Kiersten, thank you for continuing to fight the good fight. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for continuing to be a bright light to move things into the future. Wondros is lucky to have you on board and thrilled to have you as a senior fellow.
Thank you for your leadership. Kiersten. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.